Hello world, welcome back to another daily game dev video. My name is Tim Rustrick and I'm the developer of a game called Battleborn Tactics, which you can wishlist down below. Today we're talking about strategic depth and specifically how I'm adding it to this game. So I want to kind of run you through the basics of the game that I'm making, and I want to kind of show you the kinds of things that I'm thinking about strategy wise and kind of what's good about it and what's bad about it. So the game has went through a number of changes that I'm not going to go through, but basically the way the game works is every unit on the field has a move pattern in green and an attack pattern in orange. And every unit is different, so the way that they target is different. So the dog can only attack to sideways, the turkey can only attack forwards and backwards. The cow and the horse are kind of general units, and so on and so forth. So given that, every unit also has a health and a damage stat. So he's got 2 hearts, that means he's got 2 health, and then he's got 2 right here for 2 damage. Turkey has a bunch of health, 1 damage, and then rabbit has 0 damage and 1 health. Now, we were having a discussion with a bunch of people on my Twitch chat last week, but specifically one of my regulars, one of the people that's helped me out a ton with design and programming and stuff, Snipe44, he was mentioning how this game, with the basic way that it works, is basically there's always a right option. So given 3 action points shared among the team, generally given a board state of 1 turn, there's always a better thing to do. So for example, if dog does 2 damage, why would you really attack with turkey, right? Like why would you do that? So usually the best option is to like move dog forward or something like that, and get him in a position where he can attack. Now, he can only attack to the side, so strategically I just fucked up. But assuming I didn't do that, he'd be able to attack in this position right here, right? So he'd be able to take out sheep, hopefully, if he hits. Boom. And then you get an extra action point when you successfully kill. So given a board state, 2 action points, and so on and so forth, we were talking about how all of the units, even though this game can be fun and engaging, when it comes down to it, when you think about actual strategic depth, generally there's always a better move. And for a strategy game, usually that's a bad idea, right? When there's one right answer. The best games have multiple right answers, right? And if you watch my complexity versus depth video, the way that I described depth was the number of viable options at any one time, and the key word being viable. If you have a bunch of options but one's better, you don't really have a bunch of options because the rest aren't viable, right? So the number of viable options, they have to be equally as viable, or they can be various forms of viable, but they all have to be viable for the given situation. So when you're dealing with like 1 damage versus 2 damage is always better, right? If you pick up a sword in an RPG and it's got 10 damage, the other sword has 5 damage, there's no point in using the 5 damage sword. It just doesn't make sense. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with this game is I'm trying to add utility. So the bunny is like my test unit here. And when I click on the dog, for example, you can see he's got a skill called capture, so he can capture other units. And most of the units in the game actually have this skill. So turkey has it as well, capture. But bunny's got a bunch of stuff. Bunny's like a utility, okay? So bunny, he's got 1 health. He does 0 damage. He's a risky unit to have around. But right now, at least in its current form, it's probably going to change at some point because this is just me testing stuff. But he's got heal, which allows him to heal a friendly unit. He's got poison, which allow him to poison a unit. And he's got stun, which allows him to stun a unit so that they can't attack. So given lateral decisions, right? So it's not just like, does he do 3 damage or does he do 2? When given a quantifiable value, the higher number is usually always better, right? So when you're talking about strategic depth in a strategy game like this, it's a bad idea if one option is generally always better, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to add this utility to the game. So there's different things that you can do based on the resources that you have, based on the positional attributes. We're playing around with a bunch of different stuff. Like there are status effects. Like if I use my hotkeys to give him status effects, right? I can give him poison and stun. So now he's poisoned and he's stunned. And obviously we've got some more UI work to do to show that stuff off. But we're talking about maybe passive abilities that give you bonuses when you're stunned or give you bonuses when you're poisoned. We were messing around with the idea that like the pig likes to be dirty, right? So if the pig steps in mud or something like that, he gets a bonus because he would have a status effect called dirty. And basically we're just trying to think of ways where we can use abilities and passives and situational strategic choices that aren't necessarily better or worse. They're different. And that's the thing, is we want things that are different, because at the end of the day, if you're making a strategy game that's got like damage and health, right? Just purely mathematically, you can probably calculate how good any given unit is. And that's the other thing too, is if I hover over this, you can see the capture cost with this little net. That requires this many apples. So you get an apple every time you kill an enemy, but it costs X amount of apples to actually capture these enemies. So if you just take into account their number of damage, their number of health, and then how much they cost to capture, you can kind of do a mathematical estimation of how good that unit is for its cost, right? So for example, let's say a health is 1 unit and damage is 1 unit. So cow has 6 units of power, right? Turkey has 6 health and 1 damage, so turkey technically has 7 units of power. And if you're talking about the horse here, the horse / donkey horse, whatever the hell he is, he's got 4 health and 1 damage, and that means he's got 5 units of power, right? So based on 6 units of power for 5 apples, or 5 units of power for 4 apples, those are pretty balanced units, right? And then given they can both attack in all different ways, that's pretty interesting. But when you bring into account things like their attack pattern, right? So that turkey can only attack front and back. That could be problematic in certain situations. It's one of those things that's different. It's not necessarily comparable. Units like this are really good general all-around units because they can kind of hit everywhere, which I actually think Bunny is probably going to be a little more situational. But basically what I'm looking at for as far as strategic depth goes is I'm looking at viable options that are different and not necessarily quantifiable and mathematically calculable, right? So like if you stun somebody and they can't attack next turn, that has a lot of utility. Because 1, it might stop them from blocking you from going to a certain space. 1, it might help you farm boxes. It might help keep a unit alive, right? There's a lot of instances where something like stun could come in handy. Poison, the way the poison works in this game so far, we may change this in the future, but 50% chance to take a damage every time you take an action, and then 50% chance to remove itself every turn. So poison could automatically change the playing field, right? Like if turkey is poisoned, it may be in my best interest to not move him while he's poisoned, right? And to move somebody else, because there's a risk every time I move that he could take damage. But if I wait long enough, he might heal himself if he's poisoned, right? So what this does is it kind of breaks up the calculation of the game, and it makes it a little more ambiguous. And when you have more ambiguous calculation in a strategy game, you have options that aren't necessarily better or worse, they're just different, right? You have multiple options. That's when I think a strategy game becomes fun, at least for me. So I'm trying to balance the strategic depth of this game versus the simplicity of it. And again, I go into a lot of this in my complexity versus depth video, because I'm trying to minimize the complexity but maximize the depth for what it is. But the other thing I'm doing is I'm trying not to go too hardcore strategy, because this game looks like a child's mobile game. And so if I dump a bunch of crazy hard strategy in it, people are going to be confused, because the other part of that is the expectation, right? Like, what does this game look like? What do people expect when they come into it? And I can tell you right now, they're not expecting a hardcore strategy game. So going too deep would be a mistake, just like going not deep enough, which is kind of where we're at with the purely mathematical numbers. So that's all I got for you on this. I just wanted to share that kind of thought on strategic depth and kind of where I'm coming from and what my plans are for Battleborn Tactics. If this game looks good to you, I highly recommend that you wishlist it down below. There's a link. You should head over to Steam and wishlist it. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff in the final game that's going to be a lot cooler than what you see here. So I recommend you do that. But I want to say thank you to these people right here. These lovely people. They help me keep doing what I'm doing every single weekday of the week. Yeah, I said it. I'm going to own it. They help me keep doing it. And I want to say thank you. If you want your name on that list, you can head over to patreon.com/GameDevUnderground. Otherwise, I'm going to see you tomorrow for another daily Game Dev video. Bye-bye.